The kid you hear playing the piano, he's not mine. On top of the 2 weekly piano lessons and finger yoga, I give my son Smarty Pants vitamins to support his brain health because while I'm supposed to say it's not a competition, of course it's a f***ing competition. Choose Smarty Pants vitamins to support your kid's brain health and help them master whatever their chopsticks may be. Shop on Amazon, smartypantsvitamins.com, or at Target today.
This episode is sponsored by Friskies, who would like to tell your cats hi. Now, if that didn't get your cat's attention, there is one thing that always does the trick. Just pour some Friskies crunchy food in the bowl and you'll hear those paws come running. Works every time. With so many Friskies choices, you can always bring your cats running from their secret napping spots. There's always more to explore. See for yourself at friskies.com or visit your local store.
How do you top your love for your cat? With a cascade of decadent savory gravy over a mouth-watering mousse pâté. Fancy Feast gems. 2 gourmet pâtés in 1 convenient pack. Simply peel and plate to reveal a pyramid shape that makes eating delightful and pamper her with an experience as extraordinary as she is. Turn the everyday into the extraordinary with Fancy Feast gems.
Welcome to the New Books Network.
I'm Chris Holmes, and this is Burned by Books. Here you'll find interviews with writers you already love, like Jennifer Egan and Rebecca Mackay, mixed in with up-and-coming voices like Alexandra Kleeman and Rumaan Alam. You'll find us wherever you listen to podcasts, but check out previous episodes at burnedbybooks.com and on Instagram and Twitter at burnedbybooks. Let's start the show. How does one live a good life? What does it mean to try and shape your existence to exactly that purpose? This is the question at the heart of Aysegül Savas's remarkable and frankly brilliant novel, The Anthropologists. Aysha is living away from her home country with Manu, who is likewise a foreigner in a place they seek to call home. Having met in college as international students even then, the two seek an apartment to purchase as a way of cementing their lives and their futures to a city that is not their own. Aysha's job as a documentary filmmaker sends her out into a park nearby to document the ordinary people who come and go, taking joy and comfort from the park and the people they encounter there. That documentary gaze is replicated in the form of the novel itself, which marks many chapters with titles like Identity as Performance and Courtship, as though written by an anthropologist. The scenes of everyday life that Aysha captures are then modeled in her own routines and rituals. Along the way, questions of family and the distance of living away come to a head when Aysha's grandmother begins to show real signs of illness, and an aging neighbor who becomes a close confidant may or may not be slipping away. Written with a precise clarity that feels both cinematic and deeply literary, The Anthropologist carves space for itself in the traditions of Rachel Cusk, Sheila Heti, Jenny Ofel, and the contemporary avant-garde of style. This is a novel to absorb in a sitting and then plant in your imagination for weeks to come. Aysegül Savas is the author of the acclaimed novels Walking on the Ceiling and White on White. Her work has been translated into 6 languages and has appeared in The New Yorker, the Paris Review, Granta, and elsewhere. She lives in Paris. Welcome to Burned by Books, Aysegül.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. As I said, the novel takes the form of many chapters that are titled as though they were notes from an anthropologist observing another culture for an ethnography. Why was the anthropological perspective valuable to you in writing an intimate domestic fiction?
I think there are two answers to that question. The first is that I studied anthropology in college, and I always thought it was sort of a shame that I never used it because I started writing soon after I graduated. But I guess the second and more profound reason is that just that anthropological gaze is a way to make sense of one's life as a foreigner, which is one of the things I wanted to write about in this book. And also, that gaze is a way to give sort of shape or value to a life that might seem without sort of traditional markers of value, because it's not rooted, because it doesn't have, the all the rituals and customs and traditions that make up sort of a culturally rich life.
Asya and Manu are not the archetypal couple of contemporary fiction, at least Anglophone fiction. They do not harbor secret dysfunctions or affairs. They're not particularly broody or angsty. They do not constantly doubt each other or their relationship. They experience joy in each other's company, and they support each other through the difficulties, large and small, of their lives together. Do you think we're missing more fiction about good couples? And what made you want to fill that gap?
This was one of the rules I had for myself when I set out to write the novel, that, I said it, I would say to myself and then later to early readers, this is a novel about a couple that loves one another. And I mean, yes, this might be not something so usual in literature or maybe contemporary literature, but it is totally usual in modern life. I know lots of couples who are happily married or happily together, and they're not, their coupledom isn't marked by tragedy or bitterness. The couple in the novel, they have arguments, of course, but I just sort of wanted to document the daily textures of an argument rather than, something that causes conflict. And I mean, part of what you're observing here is that the novel itself doesn't have a great plot tension or drama. And I think the most obvious place to search for that would be in the relationship, because the relationship is central. And I thought, well, if it was, if their marriage was upset in some way, then the book becomes about that. And all of the other small acts that are observed in the book become background. Whereas I wanted to keep everything in the foreground in this novel. I wanted to keep all of the small rituals in the foreground so that they become the subject of the book itself.
Manu and Asya are foreigners in the city they live in, and they were international students when they first met in college. They don't properly speak each other's mother tongues. In many ways, their foreignness defines their relationship to place and to each other. What do you imagine that distance allows them to see about the place they have decided to live and the people they have decided to live with?
I guess in some ways that distance also is what brings them close together. Just because they are, as I say in the book, they're a tribe of their own. And they have to come up with their own rituals and their own customs. And I think because they're so rooted into one another's lives, they're able to observe other people. They're sort of confident enough to observe other people as quite strange. And I would also say that, they don't speak one another's native tongues, and they're foreigners in the city where they live. But I don't also think that they would feel very native if they were to return to their home countries. So these are people, and I think, this isn't only true for people who live in foreign countries, but many people who've moved, away from their hometowns, that we are increasingly feeling like strangers pretty much everywhere we live. And we also have the ability to adapt to many different forms of life. And, we're sort of metropolitan cities allow for this sort of rootedness and unrootedness. I'm also going to say, it's interesting that you're calling the narrator Asia, and you're totally right. It says in the book that she was named after a continent, and in my mind, she's Asya. But at the same time, there is no rule to how to pronounce her name, just because we don't know where she is from.
That's right. That's right.
From many different countries. And I guess that sort of mutability, not just of one sense of belonging, but of the characters and of the main city, are some of the questions that I wanted to examine.
Yeah, at one point, Asya, she thinks about what language they might babble in when they are sort of very old and perhaps senile, not knowing whether it would be her so-called mother tongue or English or something else. And I think that's a very fascinating kind of micro point about the one you're making.
Right. I mean, it's also that there's a larger point for me in there about which one of our identities take over in life. The ways in which identities overlap, they compete, they recede to the background, become more prominent. And I think language and, the type of language that becomes dominant in your mind and in your structures of thought is interesting for me as just a marker of identity.
Mm. Asya's work as a documentarian takes her to a park near where she lives. There she documents those who come regularly to enjoy the park or just pass through. She seeks to observe everyday life without hyperbole or the overdone search for cultural differences. Your novel parallels that interest in observing ordinary life. The search for a place to call home, the trials and loves of family and friends. It was the South African writer Njabulu Ndebele who called for a return to the ordinary in fiction. And it seems to me like you're responding to that call.
Yes, and this was one of the pleasures for me of writing the novel, was to think about how I could write about ordinary life, something that I myself love the routine of a day. And then to think about how I could write about that, somehow indulge in this topic without making it boring for the reader. I recently said during a conversation that, I didn't want to make the book a shopping list. And this is one of the pleasures and the challenges for me was, finding a form that might fit the ordinariness.
Mm-hmm. Language difference, as we've talked about, really resonates through the book. Asya and Manu live in a city where they speak a language not their own, and they worry about not having enough native friends, finding themselves with English speakers or expats from other places. The translation that happens as the novel smooths those differences into a regularized English still allows us to feel language as a friction rubbing against cultural difference. How does language work as a means of signaling difference and also the question of belonging, while still in a way being erased in order to allow the reader a smooth means of entering the novel?
It's sort of one of the only distinct, I guess, culturally specific details we have in the novel is that the expats are speaking English. And in one draft of the novel, that wasn't specified either. And a reader said, look, it has to be English just because there's no other possibility. Nowhere in the world do you have, I don't know, like French and German speakers living in Brazil, but they're speaking Chinese. The only language that is possible for this novel, the common language, is English. So, and it's interesting to me that, we don't know what city they're in. We don't know where they're from, but they have to resort to English. And English does have sort of this blandness to it in the sense that it erases cultural markers. But at the same time, within this, universally shared or sort of dominant language, you can have culturally specific versions. You can create your own mother tongue in some ways. The way that Asya and Manu are doing, there is one episode where Asya describes the ways in which they've created their couple's language, which, I think all couples do. They have their endearments, their inside jokes, so much so that it really becomes a language of its own that, that has its very specific codes and other people might not be able to decipher.
Yeah, it has she talks about the abbreviations they make for things and nicknames they give things.
Yes. So I did want to, within that abstract territory of one's own language disappearing and having to resort to a language that, is sort of shared by everyone, but, is not native to you. How do you carve out like specific cultural spaces for yourself, or how do you root yourself within this abstract territory?
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. Knowing you could be saving money for the things you really want, like that dream house or ride, is a great feeling. That's why the State Farm Personal Price Plan can help you save when you choose to bundle home and auto. Bundling, just another way to save with the Personal Price Plan. Prices are based on rating plans that vary by state. Coverage options are selected by the customer. Availability, amount of discounts and savings, and eligibility vary by state.
When you wanna grow your list size, pop up like a tide, pop up like a tide, pop up like a tide. And when you gotta boost your revenue, pop up like a tide, hey, pop up like a tide, pop up like a tide. Pick your favorite template, you can tailor to your brand. They're MailChimp-erific, you're gonna be a fan. MailChimp your marketing with our new customizable pop-ups.
That's beautiful. The city that your characters have chosen to settle down in is unnamed, as are the countries of origin for Asya and Manu. It is, I think, very important that they be undefined, but I would love to hear you talk through that decision and maybe how it aligns with the ideas of translation and belonging that you're exploring throughout the novel.
Yes, this was something that I was undecided about until the very last draft, I think. I would say, well, why not? It is, it's no secret that this is a very autobiographical novel, and I would say, why not make it Paris, which is the city where I've been a foreigner the longest and where, I have many expatriate friends. But then, and then the next step is, well, if they're living in Paris, where are they from? Again, why not make it autobiographical? It could be a Turkish woman. But then I thought, these are very specific. This is a very specific existence. A Turk in France is a very sort of specific sort of story. And that's not necessarily, Asya's story and background wasn't exactly what I wanted to explore here. I wanted to explore a more general sense of being estranged and trying to make a home for anywhere in the world. And that, that this book should be, relatable to lots of different types of people. Not that that is like a primary concern for me in writing. I think, books about very particular experiences are also, relatable just because we're humans. Mm-hmm. But that I did want to have this, have an openness in the narrative that allowed for the reader to focus on, daily life. And not just that one culturally specific daily life that is of, a Turk in Paris. But again, as I said, the challenge there was, how do I have an unnamed city, but still have that city feel alive and distinct and not bland or boring?
And one of the ways you do that, I think, is in the visits the couple takes to the apartments they consider buying, which are, full of life, often with the people who still live there in the space. Each one of those places offers a vision of who Asya and Manu might be in the future, how they might live. The spaces themselves are important, as well as their auras and the people they encounter there. What does the space of an apartment in the city say about the shape that we give our lives and that these characters so passionately pursue?
Right. And I mean, and actually, I guess the apartment hunt, this is true for many, many metropolitan cities, that if you're looking for an apartment to buy, you will have the same considerations no matter where you are in the world. Should I live in the city center or should I live in the suburbs? Should it be, sort of a commute, but spacious? or small and more beautiful. And that's sort of the decisions we make about our future lives regardless of the setting. And these apartments are sort of microcosms of city life and the way that people live in the city life. So Asya and Manu are seeing these apartments and thinking, are we these people? Oh no, but are we these people? And the reason I think that the question is so difficult for them to answer is that they don't really come from a structure of knowing what the future will hold for them. Perhaps, if they were from the same country and living close to their parents, there wouldn't be so many choices to make. And certain decisions would already have been taken for them. But it's this like sense of extreme freedom that also perhaps becomes oppressive for them, that they can choose anything and they can really become anyone. And I think that's why every time they decide not to buy an apartment or not to pursue it, they are relieved and they have a little celebration.
And it comes that like endless freedom also comes with the sense that they are missing things. They are missing things with their families. They're missing the routines and rites and rituals that would have been so organic to their lives had they stayed close to home. And that's a big trade-off. Could you talk a little bit about that trade-off?
It's a trade-off, but again, it's sort of, there is no other way around it. If you're with someone, unless, you convert your partner to your own culture 100%, and even that, is very, very difficult, starting with language. But if you yourself are not even practicing the customs that you came from just because you've lived in other places, then it's a sense of nostalgia, but it's something that's also sort of an illusion. The sense that, in another life you were living this very culturally rooted life is, it's not very realistic to think about, because I don't think if you left your home country and if you're with a partner who was from another culture, that life was never an option for you anyway. So I think they're quite nostalgic for it, but at the same time, I think they both know that wasn't really an option for them.
As Asya and Manu look forward into their futures, they observe those around them who are aging. They worry over aging parents and grandparents, and a particular neighbor, Teresa, who is fixed in their mind. She is smart and fascinating and interested in their lives. They read sonnets together with her, have meals and tea. And while Teresa's daughter believes that she is senile and a danger to herself, Asya and Manu see the brightness still alive in her eyes and the joy in engaging the world. Why is Teresa particularly important to how the couple sees themselves in this transitional moment in their lives?
I guess Teresa is also an example of how they could be in the future. So she's the personification of the home visits. And I thought it was important to not, this is a novel about youth in some ways, and that moment in life when you don't have big responsibilities, but you have now become an adult. But it was important for me that it wasn't just a book filled with young people and a single generation, but that there was a more interwoven generational texture. And so I wanted to have someone older. I also wanted them to have an adoptive family that would be, like brothers and sisters and grandparents. So Ravi is a little bit like a sibling and a best friend. And then we have Teresa, who's perhaps somewhat of a grandmother figure to them, or a godmother. And also she is, she's someone who is, not from the city that they're all living in. So perhaps they will grow up as Teresa did. And that question about her, whether she is senile or not, or whether she's a threat to herself, is interesting to me, again, because Asya and Manu have no responsibilities. And they don't have to, of course, they really enjoy Teresa's company and reading poems with her, just because they, they're not in charge of keeping her alive or, whether or not she falls down the stairs or leaves her door open. And I think in contrast, her daughter does have to worry about these things. And so you can't just, show up for fun dinners. And that's sort of that's the juxtaposition between having this a chosen family to whom you owe very little and living next to your parents and being responsible for them and having to take care of them.
Yeah, it's a big difference.
Yeah.
But that scene where Therese, her daughter, thinks she's gone missing and is just sort of walking the streets, but it turns out she's gone to have a nice meal for herself and go to a museum, is really a marker of how so much of the time aging is treated as a danger and an unfortunate end. And Asya and Manu really don't want to see it that way.
Right. And I think in some ways, they have the luxury of not seeing it that way. The problematic versions of aging, I think, are often reported by children.
Yeah.
Or, terrified for their parents. And also, they don't have the capacity, the energy maybe to enjoy their parents' company when they just have to worry about them aging. But Asya and Manu, just because they're foreigners and just because of sort of their distance to everything in their lives, can also, as a result of this distance, really enjoy Teresa for who she is and enjoy an older person in their lives.
Yeah, that's so true. Before I let you go, I'd love to know a little bit about what you've been reading and loving recently.
Yes, I have two books to tell you about. The first is the Book of Unconformities by an anthropologist named Hugh Raffles. It's a really, really profound, very mysterious book about rocks and sort of the human histories around these rocks, written in this gorgeous meditative style. And the second is a book of essays I just read on a plane back from New York to Paris. Any Person is the Only Self by Elisa Gabbert. And I mean, these essays are about books and reading and poetry, and they're just told with so much warmth and intelligence and so much curiosity. It was a very, very pleasurable reading experience for me.
Those sound extraordinary, and I've never heard of either of them, so I'm excited as well to get these recommendations. But I want to make sure that my listeners go out and get The Anthropologists by Aysegül Savas. It is an extraordinary novel, certainly one of my favorites of the year, and one that will make a profound impact on any reader. It was such a pleasure to get to talk to you about the novel, and I can't wait to dive into your catalog of previous work.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris. This was a pleasure for me too.
Thank you. Well, that's all from me for now. My thanks to Aysegül Savas for coming on to talk about her latest, glorious novel, The Anthropologists. You can find links to purchase The Anthropologists and all of Aysegül's recommended books at the website, Burned by Books. At the website, you'll find all of our previous episodes, links to buy a podcast t-shirt, and ways to get in contact. As you listen, take a moment to rate the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. Until next time, this has been Burned by Books.